Welcome to Self-Funded. I'm your host, Chrissy Francona. 10 years ago, starting a business around yourself was something reserved for celebrities. Today, professionals everywhere are breaking away from the 9-to-5 and building businesses around their own experience and expertise. On this show, we'll explore what it really means to be self-funded, the movement of professionals carving their own path, creating cash-flowing businesses, and building lasting impact without waiting for permission. I'll share my own journey and talk with others who are rethinking what's possible when you take your career into your own hands. Let's dive in. Today on the podcast, I have Phil Levine, the founder of Golden Gate Recruits. Phil turned his own experience navigating the somewhat nascent landscape of an early-stage chief of staff a decade ago into a powerhouse recruiting firm that has now worked for some of the biggest names in tech. Companies like Stripe and funds including Sequoia, General Catalyst, and Insight. Phil built upon his own experience as someone who transitioned from consulting to tech, which gave him credibility with the talent, along with the companies and investors who were looking to recruit for this space. He shares his early approach at building the talent side of the business, how he got some early wins leveraging his network, and how he went from being a solo founder and operator to bringing on 2 partners. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Phil Levine, welcome to Self-Funded.
Thank you for having me.
So this is take 3, I think, of us getting together. And as we talked about before I hit record, we both had some wind issues, which
Yes.
come up and, internet goes out, power goes out, and there's only so much you can control.
Things happen. You do what you got to do when you work from home and don't have generators in the buildings that you work in.
Your office manager really needs to get a generator. You got to talk to your boss about that one. So, well, first off, what is Golden Gate Recruits, which is your business?
Yeah, so we are a specialized recruiting firm. We work mostly with tech companies. Probably 70% of the roles that we work on are with tech companies. The other 30% are with investment funds, mostly venture funds, some private equity funds. And we have a really specific focus on helping people mostly coming from consulting and finance backgrounds get new jobs in that sector. So for people who aren't familiar with recruiting as a business, basically the company engages with us as a partner and says, we need this role filled. We need to hire this type of person. Sometimes it's very specific. Sometimes it's kind of nebulous. And then we will help find the right candidates, interview them, and get the right people in process with that company to help them find ultimately the right candidate for what it is that they're looking for.
Very cool. So a lot to dig into. I feel like, something that's really interesting about what you're doing is you've probably brought recruiting into an area that tech companies didn't even know they needed the role, let alone needed a recruiter to find the role. So I think that really goes back to your own journey. Can you talk a little bit about your experience on the talent side and what sort of was the foundation for Golden Gate?
Yeah, for sure. I'll give you context on like my background as a whole, because I think that fits in. So I actually don't have any experience on the talent side. I never was a recruiter. I never worked in people. It kind of fell naturally by nature of the things that I had done. So I'm from St. Louis originally. I went to Penn for undergrad. Penn, like lots of schools, has like a very clear track into consulting, into investment banking, and more structured corporate jobs like that. I ended up working at Bain, like you, and did that for a couple years. I was in the Chicago office, which was nice to be close to home. I ended up joining Bain. I don't think we ever talked about this, but my uncle, who lives in the Chicago suburbs, had a neighbor of his who worked at Bain, and he was always my like mentor as it relates to job stuff and life stuff. But he was a partner in the Bain office, and he was telling me that Ted, his neighbor, had spent the past 6 months flying to London to work on the Anheuser-Busch InBev merger. And as someone from St. Louis, I was like, oh my God, that is the coolest thing that I could ever possibly imagine. Like, your job is to take Anheuser-Busch and like merge it together with this like other company, and you get to work on beer stuff all day. It sounds awesome. And so I ended up getting an internship at in the Chicago office, and then doing that full time for a couple of years, which was an awesome experience. And then I had a friend of mine from growing up who went to Stanford, started a company while he was in school, and then started another company thereafter. And we had kind of talked about entrepreneurial stuff for a while, and he gave me a call and was like, I need a business person. I need someone. We have a bunch of engineers. We have a bunch of researchers. I need someone who can just help me with all of the other non-technical stuff. And there's some specific things that could take the form of, but I just need someone who can help. And so I ended up leaving Bain and moving out to the Bay Area in 2014, and joined him as the first business person. My title and on my business card literally was business. There was no title, there was no specificity, there was no function. It was business, which is kind of hilarious when you think about that. But I had kind of all of the roles at some portion of time while I was there. Initially, as we were thinking about who our customers were, I helped think through like, what are the different customers by how big they are and where they're located and who we could work with potentially. And then as we started kind of getting inroads to customers, I helped the CEO have some of those initial sales conversations and put together the materials that we would work with them. Once we had some customers, then I was doing the kind of post-sales customer success account management function until we then built that out. And then as we thought about expansion, would help with that, did some finance stuff, did some ops stuff, et cetera. And I did that for about 3 years, and had a good journey. And I was thinking about my own experience, and I was interviewing at some companies. I was talking to some later stage tech companies and some earlier stage stuff, but there wasn't really anything that worked, and there were no recruiters who focused on that space. And so I ended up starting this recruiting firm, which we can go into the details of how I came up with it. But I ended up starting this recruiting firm and have been doing it for about 9 years now.
That's awesome. It's interesting. I'm curious what pain point you saw there, because I imagine you were dealing with companies that weren't even necessarily using recruiters at all. And you could probably fairly easily get to a founder and explain yourself, like your value. Was it, hey, you saw an opportunity because these founders were doing a million things to just get them leverage and you had access to this talent through Bain? Like what was it that made you go from like, hey, there's a little bit of friction here to I'm going to dedicate a decade plus? I mean, I'm sure you didn't necessarily think of it a decade ahead at that point, but about it from that lens. Dedicating your life and your professional life to this going forward.
I think there's a couple. So there's a couple of kind of conversations and moments that I distinctly remember that led to that. One was I remember having a conversation with kind of like a generic recruiter who, I don't know if he had reached out to me, if I got connected to him through someone in my network. But I was going through the exercise of trying to explain what I could do, what I did. And he just didn't get it. He was like, so are you a product person? I'm like, no, not really. Are you a salesperson? No, not really. Are you just a finance person? No, not
They're
really.
Like a little bit of everything and none of those at the same time. All of
this seems like I can do it, but that's not who I am. And it just didn't click. And I was like, God, there aren't recruiters who understand this profile. And frankly, it was at a time where the background of having gone from consulting finance into startup techland was still super nascent. There were companies like Yahoo that had built out BizOps teams to do this. LinkedIn was just starting to do this. You were seeing this at companies like NerdWallet back in the day. But you didn't have all of these reps of success that companies had found hiring this person. And it was in the early days of that just starting to become a thing where, you saw people at Stripe, at Open Door, et cetera, that were fantastic at their job. And when people would come to the CEO and say, who are the types of people that you hired? How were you successful? What led to like this extreme growth that you have? And they pointed to some of these examples that just has started to spread over the years. And I feel super lucky that I started doing this at a point where that was just in the early days of taking off.
Very cool. And so it's sort of, you saw the opportunity, you probably to some extent like anticipated a trend that was starting. And I think also imagine as people were starting to trickle into these companies, then they're working their way up into more executive roles. And so you have suddenly, then you have, a few years in, you have executives who have a consulting background and understand that experience as well.
And I think what's interesting is in the early days, I started building relationships with different VCs where I had worked with a startup. They then connected me to their investors and then started building relationships from them. And in the early days, a lot of the conversations that I had with companies was not, hey, I have this role, can you help me? It was more often the investor saying, hey, Phil, can you help me have a conversation with the CEO to help convince them why they need to hire this profile? Because we know that they need to hire this profile, but they don't know that they need to hire this profile. And I want you to help show them what these types of people can do, help them see the different types of functions that they can help with. And now it's a known quantity. It's a very known thing that like, cool, when you start a company, you hire an awesome chief of staff. And what does that person's background look like? A couple years of consulting or banking, a couple years of operating experience, et cetera. But that wasn't a thing, right? So in the early days, I was talking to these technical founders like, so what is this person can do? And again, I explained that it's like, it's not marketing, it's not sales, it's not finance, but it's someone who can kind of do the 80% version of each one of those and then hire the functional leader and expert thereafter to then be successful. But in the interim, when you don't need a CMO, when you don't need a chief people officer, you can use this person to kind of fill in those gaps as you continue to scale and iterate and evolve.
As you're talking, one of the things I'm thinking about is in that conversation, a founder who is naturally skeptical of anyone who's not an engineer and probably also concerned about burn. And when you're talking about early stage, I always think of it as like product tech go to market. How do you sort of justify, like, how did you justify it or explain it from like an ROI perspective? Was that a conversation you had to have?
Yeah, no, for sure. I think that's a really good way of thinking about it. I think that the best way to think about it is that for some period of time, you don't know necessarily what you need to hire yet. And you're not quite at a scale where it makes sense to hire a CFO. And so even though this generalist person is going to be a relatively expensive resource compared to a lot of the other people who you're hiring, you're able to remove the need of hiring a CFO today. You can remove the need of hiring a head of customer success today. You can remove the need of hiring a chief people officer. And by delaying those hires, this person actually fills in the gaps to the extent that is required at your size and stage for some period of time that allows you to kind of reduce what your overall cost would be, even though you're investing in this person who's going to help. And I think the other thing is especially when it comes to things like chief of staff specifically, founders know that their time is extremely limited, and that if they can be 20% more effective, 10% more effective, 50% more effective by hiring this person who's going to take 30, 40, 50% of their work off of their plate, great. Like there's the value, right? And so if you think of it as like an alternative to the founder's time, who both on a dollars perspective, on an investment perspective, on a like what they could potentially do to help accelerate the company to the next level, this person is more than worth their weight in gold.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting too, because I think you're certainly making the case for early days, why it makes sense. Someone might be more expensive on a per person basis, but when you look at sort of the gap they can fill and extend, they're almost giving you extension on your runway before you have to bring in some of those executives. On the talent side, though, how was that case? So you're building to both sides of it. Like the talent side, was that an easy sell to people? Because look, a job at Bain, it's a pretty lucrative opportunity, and maybe there are actually, even though it's expensive for the startup, it may be a step down for people coming from that environment.
In the earlier days, 100%, right? Again, it wasn't a known quantity. No one had heard of any of these companies. And I think you hadn't seen success stories of people going to an organization and having some of the equity upside, having the career acceleration. Today, it's easy, right? Like everyone knows that people can go from consulting into startups, tech companies, et cetera, and have this like massive career acceleration that you aren't able to have in another setting. But 10 years ago, certainly wasn't the case. And I think I had to spend more time personally explaining to candidates what you actually do and what the different versions of these roles were, and what the career growth and pathway looked like. Now it's assumed, it's learned from their peers. They have people who they can talk to about it. But I think in the early days, I was kind of their like resource, and they didn't really know what that looked like, and it took more time to like nurture people through that decision to ultimately leave consulting. There were oftentimes people who I spoke to for 2 years of like slowly getting them more and more comfortable with the idea of leaving Bain or McKinsey or what have you. Whereas now it's more of a known quantity, and it's something that people naturally can go and do.
Well, and I think
the compensation has changed in such a way that's not actually a step down, right? Previously, it was actually like a very large step down that people had to get comfortable with. Today, people are actually leaving consulting and going to a startup and making more money in many cases. And so that dynamics actually flipped itself on its head completely.
That's interesting. Yeah. And as you're talking, one of the things I'm thinking about is this, you're building a relationship with the talent you mentioned for 2 years, sort of, you're probably, they could do the job and it would be a great fit for them. They don't necessarily know it, or they're not, at a point where they're ready to kind of take that leap. But if I go back to, you were not a recruiter traditionally, but you sat in the shoes of these people. I feel like that's something that probably actually gave you a leg up in this space. If you had walked the walk. And can you talk a little bit about that?
100%. And it's actually, it's interesting. So I think there's two pieces on that. One is when I first was going through this like exploration of what I want to do after leaving the startup that I was at, the first version of this business was actually completely flipped from what it is today. And I came at it from the approach of, one, I didn't know anything about recruiting firms or executive search or like how that was even a business that existed. And I kind of like learned that over time through some conversations. But the first version was, I'm going to flip this like recruiting relationship on its head. And I'm actually going to work with you, the candidate, to help you think through what you want to do. And I'll help you put together the right resume, and I'll help you get connected to the right companies and kind of put together a targeted list of companies that you can go after and find the right roles, and be your agent, not AI agent, but
talent agent,
sports agent, talent agent, to help you find what you're going to do. And I did that for a couple months, and it was fun. It's a hard problem and a hard business to be in because, one, most people don't want to pay you that much.
Yeah. Were you trying to charge the talent at that time?
I was trying to charge the candidate. So I would charge people, $500 or $1,000 to like help them think through what they wanted to do. And the issue that you get is that the really good people don't want to pay you because they can find jobs on their own. And the really bad people really want to pay you. And so I got into this situation where there was a guy who was like a managing director from some investment bank who reached out to me and got connected to me through some channel. And I ended up meeting up with him in San Francisco, just like not a good person. And was like, he was like, I'm going to be a CFO at these tech companies and I'm going to make this amount of money. I'm like, I can't work with you. He's like, I already paid you. Like, you need to work for me. I'm like, can I just give you your money back, please? And you have this like lemons problem, right? Of the good people don't want to pay you and the bad people do want to pay you. And then you end up having this talent pool of not good people that just doesn't work. But to get back to what we were talking about before, I think that ethos has been a thread from the very early days, which is build relationships with candidates and still be their agent, be their advisor, be their like trusted thought partner, independent of whether they're paying me. Like there are candidates who have tried to pay me to do that stuff. I'm like, don't take any money from candidates. It's not how I work. But still trying to bring that like thoughtfulness and agent-like mentality to the relationship, as opposed to some recruiters who come at it from the lens of, I am employed by the company, I am working on their behalf, this is a one-sided relationship, and I'm viewing the candidate as like an input to my thing that I'm building, right? And view them as like a raw material as opposed to a person that they're serving and a human. And I think when you treat people like people, it obviously all works out a lot better.
Well, I also think, I think you're great at it. Like we connected originally through an opportunity and, have stayed in touch a bit over the last couple of years. And I can't tell you how many conversations, obviously my network is heavy former consultants. And I can't tell you how many conversations I've had with people where I'm like, who want to do something in a generalist space in tech. And I'm like, well, have you, I was like, I know the guy you need to connect with, and they'll say your name before I do. And I'm like, okay, well, you're already on his email list. Like you have sort of, I think from the talent side, like you have such a clear, like, I love even the language on your website. Like, it's so clear of how you started this. And I think it's one of the reasons I wanted to interview for this, because my notion of a self-funded business is something that's built around your own experience. And I think that you've done that in a way where, because you were this candidate and you've been through the process, the good, bad, and the ugly of getting into tech and finding a path there, I just think you come at it from such a different angle. So just unsolicited feedback.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I really, and I think like that's frankly, like, we talked about, I've done this for almost 10 years. And like, that's the reason why I keep doing it, is because I enjoy that. And it's nice to receive that feedback from people on a regular basis, which makes it more fun.
So 10 years, long time. You're welcome. 10 years, long time. You have some pretty marquee clients at this point. I think you it's both on the fund side and then certainly on the startup side. Tell me a little bit about how you got some of those relationships early on. Like, is there a particular one early on that you felt like, okay, this is, maybe looking back, like, this is sort of the moment of, okay, this is a really credible company that people know, and you started to get some momentum around?
Yeah. Oh man, there's a couple.
Okay, well, sure.
Let's see. So there's a guy named Jesse Puggi, who I cold emailed. He was the founder of a company called
Also from St. Louis, right?
Also from St. Louis, went to Penn, worked at McKinsey. Do you know Jesse?
No, I just follow him. I know. Okay. I'm familiar with him.
He's ended up, he has like a very big brand and presence, and like posts a lot of stuff out there. And I cold emailed him probably like 2 or 3 months into starting this. And the initial way, now almost all of our business comes from referrals, both on the candidate side and the company side. But in the early days, I just had to reach out to whoever I could. And so I tried to find who were the ex-consultants who went to Penn, who were the Bain people in San Francisco who were working at startups. And I came across Jesse and I emailed him something along the lines of like, greetings from another Cardinals fan or something along those lines.
Yeah.
Fellow like St. Louis plus Penn consultant. And I think actually thinking about compared to like the AI generated junk that goes out these days was like, it was not long. It was not overly dense. It was just like short, sweet. I'm also from St. Louis and like would love to see if we could work together. And he took a flyer on me. And I think that was one of the first more like real relationships that I had with a company that I could start to get some volume on. And actually, like, I worked out of their office a couple days a week.
Cool.
And I think in the same way that people who are early users of software and technology products and the founders like give us product feedback, and the really good ones that are early like take that product feedback and continue to build it. Jesse treated it in that way where he was like, I'm going to give you all of the feedback on what you can be doing better to make this work well. And that was extremely beneficial, which was helpful. The second was there was a company that I worked with in the early days that a Bain person from Chicago happened to work at, which is how I got connected to them in the first place, a company called Mux that ended up being a company that I did a ton of work with over the next couple of years in the early days. And I ended up placing a guy who came in as their head of strategy and ops, who ended up becoming their COO. And he was the guy who ran their board meetings and worked with their investors. And one of their early investors was Excel. And I ended up getting connected to a guy named Dan Levine, no relationship whatsoever, who's an extremely successful investor at Excel, because he asked Salman, like, how did you find out about Mux? And he was like, well, I worked with this guy, Phil. And Dan was like, that sounds good. I'd like to talk to him. And he has the same name as me. And Dan connected me to their head of talent, a guy named Pete at Excel, who has an incredible reputation in the VC talent world. I think he was at Greylock running talent. He helped start True, and more importantly, he is just an incredible human, just like a very ethical, no bullshit, doesn't sell you on things, is just like an honest, good human, just like a very good human, and is very respected within the VC talent world. And Dan connected me to Pete, and I met up with Pete in San Francisco. And a couple weeks later, there was like a day that it happened. I got this crazy inbound from like 30 or 40 VC talent partners at all these different funds. And clearly Pete had posted something on some like VC talent listserv around like, you should work with Bill Levine if you're trying to hire for this type of role. And that I really I attribute a lot of like the success and network from, honestly, that like one individual thing. And obviously that came from, I did a good job at Mux, but it was also just like luck and timing and the like that all kind of came together. And then the third big example that has been probably single-handedly the biggest driver for us is when I worked at the startup that I was at. We had a guy named Matt Moshari who was an investor in the company and was the interim COO. And I was the chief of staff during that. And so I worked very closely with Matt. And I was the example of the chief of staff, BizOps, ex-Bain person who was doing the role that he most clearly saw. And he has since built an extremely successful executive coaching brand called Moshari Method that he's coached Sam Altman from OpenAI and Brian from Coinbase and a number of investors from all of the top VC funds, and has built an extremely strong reputation that has kind of flown through Y Combinator listservs and just like the ecosphere. And he posts a lot of kind of free online content around how to be a good CEO and how to run a business successfully. And he posted an article around like you should have a chief of staff, and explained why you should have a chief of staff, why it's effective, why people like it, what it can do. Again, to the point that we talked about at the beginning of it becoming more of a thing and a known quantity of why it makes sense to hire these type of people and kind of some of the success stories that came from it. And in his Word doc, he says the background that you should be looking for is someone who's worked a couple of years in Bain. And it is Phil Levine, and he also runs a recruiting firm called Golden Gate Recruits that looks for this specific person. And that's been an incredible kind of source of inbound that, again, I didn't try to do that. He did that, which has been like a huge favor for me, and I really appreciate it. I'm still quite close with him. That naturally kind of created this like market adoption and us being a known quantity. And as you know, oftentimes the best way to get like a really strong referral is they're like, cool, I've heard about you from like 4 different people. I saw you on like Pete posted this thing, and I saw you that Matt Moshari posted about you, and like my other 2 friends worked with you. And that kind of combination of things works out well.
That's really cool. I love all these stories, and it's a couple themes I'm thinking about as you're describing it. Is this is going to sound like a strange analogy, but I'm like thinking about almost this like marketing landscape you've built where you have like earned media, for lack of a better term, which is like earned relationships, which is all these examples you're giving of placement in this newsletter and referrals into the whatever talent email distro list you were included on. You get these 30 to 40 leads. And then almost, again, like not quite the right analogy, but you have this like earned attention and like paid attention, which isn't really the right other side of it. But almost you're talking about like, hey, you're seeking out, I mean, probably better said, like inbound is coming from this earned area and outbound is much more deliberate. And one thing I just want to highlight as you were talking about reaching out to Jesse and others, I love this notion of, hey, I'm St. Louis and Penn, or like that too. I think, and you're totally right. Like my inbox, and I'm sure yours is even worse, is just filled with these AI spam. And it'll be like, I see you founded the Long Game, and it's like pulled right from my LinkedIn, versus if someone was like, hey, I also went to Duke and I started my career at Bain, I'm going to open that one 10 times out of 10.
100%. Totally. Yep. And I think, that, when I first started and was thinking about how can I try and drum up some semblance of business, it was like, who are all the Penn people? Who are the Bain people? And those networks are valuable. Those networks are really, really valuable. And certainly, I learned something at Bain and going to Penn, but I think the network and like the stamp and like shared connection, regardless of whether it's Penn or Bain or anything else, helps to get someone to at least open it up.
Absolutely. So, okay. So you where were you, how far along in your business were you when you started to get these like 30 to 40 leads at a time? Like how many years in were you?
Oh man. I mean, so I started in early 2017. Working on like a variety of different businesses, including the like talent agent thing and the like. And I was probably fully invested in the current version of the business as it stands in March, April, May of 2017. And
wait, so within like 6 months of starting? Wait.
Oh, no. I was working on a random assortment of ideas.
Okay.
and I solidified that
Okay.
I would work on this specific business within 3 or 4 months,
Okay, got it.
order of magnitude. It probably wasn't until 2019, maybe 2020, that like the level of inbound really started happening. And certainly throughout all of 2017, certainly throughout most of 2018, probably, a good chunk of 2019, I was still doing a decent amount of outbound. And again, it was outbound that wasn't, hi, we have a recruiting firm and we help people hire biz ops. It was, the girlfriend of one of my friends from Penn works at Via. Like, I'm going to ping her and see if she's open to having a conversation. And this candidate that I worked with who had a really good experience working with me ended up joining Bolt. So like, now I'll like reach out to her and see how she's doing and grab lunch with her and go to the office and then see if I happen to figure out a way to work with them. It was all very relationship driven and less so this like cold outbound thing, right?
Sure.
And even, we think about some of the very cold outbound that I did to Jesse, for example. That became an even more rare thing that started to fade off. And what it quickly took the shape of was network-driven outbound, right? Okay. In a very targeted and specific way. And my wife jokes that I like didn't pay for any food when I was living in San Francisco for 2 years because I just spent all day like going from company to company, office to office, like getting free lunch and snacks and like throwing them into my backpack. Not a bad way to do it, especially when you're not making any money. But like that kind of cultivated those relationships in a very real way that paid a ton of dividends down the road, but it certainly wasn't immediate that a lot of the like things clicked and there was a step change happened. It was certainly 2-3 years from when I got started until that happened because it takes time to prove yourself out.
Absolutely. So you're sort of a one-man show still at this point. You're doing all the BD, but I like to think of it, you're working on the business.
Show who didn't know whether I was going to continue doing this for, an extended period of time or not.
Yeah, no, that's like always hanging over your head. I gave this example in another episode I did, but have you ever read Shoe Dog? The Nike book? Okay.
Yes.
So my biggest, I feel like I'm just going to recommend this book on every single episode, but my biggest takeaway from it was how it was so shocking how it felt like they were always on the edge of a cliff until they went public.
Yep.
And obviously like, you're not looking to go public, but there is sort of this like, when you're doing this, even if you're like full speed ahead, you're in it.
Yeah.
It's still this like, okay, is this going to work? Like, I don't know.
For sure.
It's challenging. So
for sure. Yeah. I remember when I first started, I had a conversation with my dad who's like, so it's like, what are you doing? Are you like sitting on your couch all day? You left your job. And it's kind of like, you need to, prove that you're actually doing something, as opposed to just futzing around.
Yeah, for sure. So okay, you're one-man show, you're doing all this, you're figuring out, is this working? At some point, you end up building out a team that you have now. Can you talk a little bit about your team structure today and then the evolution to get there? Because I think that's something I think a lot of people are trying to think about.
Totally. So in the early days, one of the big kind of time sucks within the recruiting space, which there's a lot of technology that has solved today, is solving today, et cetera, is this very manual sourcing exercise. And when I say sourcing, what I specifically mean is going through LinkedIn, looking at profiles and deciding whether that profile is a good fit or a bad fit, right? Think like Tinder, right? Like you go through a bunch of profiles, like yes, no, yes, no, and what are the criteria that allow that to make sense? And at the time, again, I wasn't making any money, didn't have resources to hire someone expensive at least, and so I used Upwork, which I think it's still around, but allows you to help find like hourly workers essentially. And so I ended up hiring someone in the Philippines to do project-based work with me, and found that extremely helpful, successful, not particularly expensive. And that was the first person who I hired. And that was more as like a project-based thing. But as we would have a new search, I would then work with Ranji to kind of put together the criteria of what she needed to look for, what the search looked like. And then she would kind of come back with a spreadsheet of here are 100 people to reach out to, some of it in more of a campaign automated-esque type way. And some of it like Phil's going to ping Chrissy to say, hey, can you connect me to your friend Dave? And so that was the first place where I started. And I had a couple of like college interns along the way who helped me with some other variety of tasks. But probably for the first 3 years, that was where I invested kind of building out people. And it was still Phil with like a little bit of help from some of these outsourced people, some of which who I ended up hiring full-ish time to work with me exclusively. And then the point where that really shift from like the Phil show to a hiring someone based in the US who's like a relatively expensive resource was in 2020. I had started thinking about the fact that I like needed to hire someone just because there was so much that was on my plate that it would be beneficial to hire like a real recruiter talent person. And I had a couple of conversations with folks that didn't end up leading to, I got very close with one person, but didn't end up leading to the perfect person. And I randomly got connected to this guy, Nick, who his manager at Bain, all comes back to Bain. His manager at Bain was a woman who was in my intern class, who I stayed close with throughout. And he was interested in talent stuff. And Brittany just connected Nick to talk to me about like the world of talent and people. And I introed him to a bunch of people that I knew who were heads of talent and people in the recruiting space, just to try and be helpful again, from the lens of what we talked about at the very beginning of just like, try and be a helpful person, try and be a career advisor, try and just like do what you can to be a nice person to help someone out. And that led us to being like, cool, we can also talk about, he was like, well, tell me more about what you do. And that led us to have some conversations. And he ended up joining me towards the end of 2020, right in COVID days. And he was the first full-time US-based, call it expensive resource, who I hired. And he's been with me for about 5.5 years and has been incredible in helping us to kind of take it to the next level. And there was a shift that happened where it was like, the Phil show with like Nick helping me out for the first year or two to like, cool, now it's kind of like the Phil and Nick show, right?
That's great.
And then we ended up hiring a third talent partner, Mia, just about 3 years ago, and had like a similar evolution happen with that, where it was the Phil and Nick show to now like the Phil, Nick, and Mia show, which has been fun. And it's been nice for me to feel like I don't work for myself. I like work for GGR, cool. And like have colleagues of Nick and Mia to work with, which is way more fun.
The loneliness aspect of starting this type of business is not lost on me. Yeah,
totally. And I actually, it's interesting because I solved that in the early days, by not making it feel as lonely. So like I worked at the Amp Push office 2 days a week. I got connected to the founders of Loom when they were like 5 people because a guy that I knew from Bain, he went to high school with one of the founders of Loom. And so like I worked out of there for free, just like tried to take some office space out of their shared office space originally, which was in another startup's co-working space. And then later in their office when they got a full-time office, that like gave me some colleagues. And they weren't colleagues, but like I sat in a room with the people who worked at Loom and the people who worked at Zeus and the people who worked at Ampush, and it made it feel like it wasn't just me sitting at home on my couch doing this. And that mixed with getting lunch with people and having it be more externally facing made it feel that much better. And I certainly don't. I now live in Boulder, so it's hard to go in person to people's offices. But I tried to spend any check-in that I would ever have was in person at the company's office, and then I would like work there for a couple hours and steal their snacks and eat their lunch and what have you.
Yeah, there's like a whole other episode on like how to get free office space and food in San Francisco. So, or I'm just like,
I was very, very good at it. I was very, very, very good at it. But yeah, it made it feel less lonely. It made it feel less like it was just me, because I was working out of an office, and it wasn't a consistent office, but like it was an office. I worked at Wharton, had like a exec MBA space in San Francisco that you could rent rooms for free at. And so like there were a couple other friends who were working on their own ideas that I would hang out there and eat their free trail mix.
You need like a rating system of all the food as well.
Yes,
so
exactly.
No, that's great. I know we're coming up on time, and I feel like we could chat for a long time longer, but your journey is so cool. And I love that you took this experience you had, this gap you saw in the market, you used your network, you've built the credibility, you've done the role yourself. So you're kind of credible both on the talent side and the hiring side. What advice do you have for someone who is, maybe where you were in even 2016, maybe those early days of 2017, like want to start a business around something they've experienced or this expertise, but aren't even sure sort of where to start?
Yeah. I think you just got to start, again, we come back to Nike, but like, you just got to do it. You just got to start somewhere. And starting somewhere will ultimately lead to where it is that you're going, or it will lead to you deciding that going down the entrepreneurial path isn't what makes sense for you and you should go do something else. But the only way to do it is just doing it and trying it out and being open and being flexible and kind of being honest with yourself around what you like and what you don't like, and then giving yourself time. It doesn't happen immediately. A lot of these things just naturally take time over the course of stuff. And the initial, I think for any small business, the initial business development, you have to think about it from a long-term perspective. And if you just think about it in a short-term perspective, then none of it's worthwhile. None of it pays for itself. But if you think about it as I'm going to spend a little bit more time to invest in this relationship because it will probably pay dividends over the next 10 years, then it becomes incredibly valuable to do that. And I think like the second thing is there's a lot of people who try and create hacks, right? I've seen success from like branded content or like, let's do branded content, or people talk highly about this person who's like a nice person. I should be a nice person, like I should try and make people think that I'm a nice person. You're just like, just be a good person. Just be a nice person. Try and be helpful, be authentic, be real. Like, don't bullshit your way to a certain extent. because finding the like fake version of it versus actually it being real doesn't actually solve it in the long term. You know, I think that like you see a lot of companies that have tried to embrace what Google did to be successful, right? Like Google had free snacks and like color on the walls. And they're like, cool, let's analyze what Google did and make our office feel like Google, but we're still going to be assholes. And like, no, it doesn't work if you do it, you know, like do what works for you and be genuine about it. And if genuinely you are a nice, kind person, then be a genuinely nice, kind person. And if you're going to be a direct person, then like be a direct person, but make it real, because otherwise none of it really matters.
I love that. Well, I think that has probably been a big part of your success. So I appreciate you sharing the advice and also just sharing your story today. Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course.
Where can people find you, especially on the talent side, if they're interested in learning more about what you do?
Yeah, feel free to reach out on LinkedIn. Our website is goldengaterecruits.com. And you can feel free to email me, phil@goldengaterecruits.com as well.
Great. Well, cool. Phil, thank you again. And
thank you.
I'm excited to share your story. Thanks for listening to Self-Funded. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to follow the show wherever you're listening so you don't miss what's coming next. I'd also love for you to leave a review and share what you're most excited about on your own self-funded journey. And if you want to go deeper, check out my Substack. You'll find the link below. Until next time, keep carving your own path.